The city street was loud in a way only a crowded evening could be, full of honking horns, flashing lights, and hurried footsteps that never seemed to notice anything beyond themselves. In the middle of that chaos, an elderly man stood frozen at a crosswalk, his hands trembling around grocery bags that looked heavier than they should have been. Around him, laughter cut through the noise, sharp and cruel, as a group of young men circled closer. No one stepped in. No one slowed down. Everyone looked away. And then, from the edge of the sidewalk, a familiar figure stopped walking. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes narrowed. In that single moment, something shifted in the air. Within seconds, the noise of the street would fade into silence, and everyone there would remember what they witnessed for the rest of their lives. Before we continue, support powerful stories like this. Like the video, share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel Black Voice Story for more real, thought-provoking narratives. The city had a way of swallowing people whole. It didn't matter how long someone had lived there or how many years they had walked its streets. It could still make a person feel invisible. For many elderly residents, especially black men who had lived through decades of quiet discrimination, that invisibility was something they had learned to wear like a second skin. The old man at the center of the intersection was one of them. He had spent most of his life working jobs that barely paid enough but demanded everything he had. His hands were thick with age and labor, his back slightly bent from years of carrying weight that went far beyond groceries. He lived alone in a small apartment that smelled faintly of old books and instant coffee, surrounded by memories of a time when his voice mattered even if the world refused to listen. That evening, he had done nothing unusual. He had taken the bus to a discount grocery store, carefully choosing items that fit both his needs and his limited budget. He paid in exact change, folded the receipt neatly, and stepped back outside into a city that was already growing impatient with the night. His only goal was to cross the street and catch the bus home. But the city had other plans. The group of young men noticed him almost immediately. They weren't looking for a reason. They never were. To them, he represented something easy, something they could mock without consequence. His age, his race, the way he moved a little slower than everyone else, all of it marked him as a target. At first, it was just laughter. Then came gestures. Then comments loud enough for him to hear, but quiet enough for everyone else to pretend they hadn't. He tried to ignore them. He focused on the traffic light, on the white walking figure that refused to appear. Around them, people passed by. Some glanced briefly, their eyes flickering with discomfort before snapping back to their phones. Others stared straight ahead, pretending nothing was happening. The unspoken rule of the city was clear: mind your own business. A few feet away, Mike Tyson had just stepped out of a nearby building. Years had passed since the height of his fame, but his presence was still unmistakable. He walked without security, without spectacle, blending in as much as someone like him ever could. To most people, he was just another man in a jacket, moving through the city with purpose. Until he noticed the old man. Mike had seen a lot in his life: violence, cruelty, fame, loss. He had also seen how the world treated black men differently depending on their age, their power, and their ability to fight back. The sight unfolding in front of him wasn't new, but that didn't make it easier to watch. The laughter of the young men carried over the traffic noise, and something about it made his stomach tighten. He slowed his steps. He watched the way the old man's shoulders hunched inward, how his grip tightened around the grocery bags, as if letting go might cause everything else to fall apart. Mike didn't move right away. He stood there, observing, the weight of his own history pressing down on him. He knew what it meant to be feared. He knew what it meant to be underestimated. And he knew, perhaps better than anyone, how quickly situations like this could spiral into something far worse. The traffic light remained red. The old man remained trapped. And the young men, emboldened by the silence of everyone around them, moved closer. The harassment intensified not because the old man reacted, but because he didn't. His quiet endurance seemed to fuel them. To the group, his silence was permission. It was proof that they could push further, say more, step closer without consequence. One of the grocery bags tore slightly at the bottom. The thin plastic stretched too far. A can slipped out and rolled across the pavement. The sound was small, almost insignificant, but it felt loud in that moment. The old man bent slowly to retrieve it, his balance unsteady, his dignity hanging by a thread. That was when a few people finally noticed. A woman across the street paused mid-step. A delivery driver slowed his bike. But still, no one intervened. Fear took many forms, and in the city, it often looked like indifference. Mike Tyson felt something inside him harden. He remembered his own youth, the way anger had once controlled him, the way the world had both feared and exploited him. He remembered the countless times he'd been judged not as a human being, but as a symbol of violence, of danger, of something to be controlled. And now, watching this elderly man be reduced to a joke, he saw the same dehumanization playing out in a quieter, more insidious way. The young men laughed louder. One of them mimicked the old man's slow movements. Another gestured toward the grocery bags, exaggerating the effort it took to carry them. The mockery wasn't just about age. It was layered with something deeper, something rooted in centuries of disrespect. Mike took a step forward. He didn't announce himself. He didn't raise his voice. He simply moved closer, his presence cutting through the chaos like a shadow crossing the sun. At first, the young men didn't notice him. Their attention was fixed on their target, on the thrill of power they felt in that moment. But others noticed. A ripple moved through the small crowd that had unknowingly gathered. Heads turned, eyes widened, whispers spread. Recognition came slowly. Then all at once, the old man straightened slightly, not because a harassment had stopped, but because he sensed a change in the air. Something felt different. The laughter behind him faltered. Just for a second, Mike stepped fully into view. The young men turned. Their expressions shifted as they took him in. Confusion came first, then recognition, then fear. The city street, moments ago so loud and alive, began to quiet. Car horns seemed to fade. Footsteps slowed. Conversations died mid-sentence. It wasn't just that they recognized him. It was what he represented. Not just a former champion, but a living reminder of consequences. Mike's face was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of everything he had lived through. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone asked a question that hung heavily in the air. Why was this happening? And who's going to stop it? The young men shifted uncomfortably. Their bravado drained away as quickly as it had appeared. The power dynamic flipped in an instant. The same crowd that had ignored the old man now watched closely, aware that something important was unfolding. Mike looked past the young men toward the elderly man. His gaze softened. In that look was recognition, respect, and something else. An unspoken apology for a world that had allowed this to happen. The old man met his eyes, surprised, uncertain, but no longer alone. The young men stepped back, one by one. No one laughed now. No one spoke. The silence pressed down on them, heavy and uncomfortable, forcing them to confront what they had been doing moments earlier. The traffic light finally changed. The walk signal flashed white, and for a brief moment, no one moved. It was as if the entire street had forgotten how to function. The old man hesitated, unsure whether it was safe to step forward. Years of experience had taught him that safety was never guaranteed. Mike noticed. Without saying a word, he positioned himself slightly beside the old man, not blocking him, not leading him, but offering something rarely given in moments like this: protection without control. The message was clear to everyone watching. This man would not be harmed. The young men stood frozen, their earlier confidence replaced with shame and fear. They avoided eye contact, suddenly aware of the eyes upon them. The crowd that had once looked away now watched intently, some with guilt, others with quiet relief that someone else had stepped in. As the old man took his first step into the crosswalk, the silence deepened. Each step felt deliberate, heavy with meaning. This was no longer just about crossing a street. It was about reclaiming dignity in a world that had tried to strip it away. Mike walked alongside him, his presence steady, unyielding. Cars waited. Drivers watched. The city, for once, paused. Halfway across, the old man stumbled slightly. One of the grocery bags shifted, threatening to spill its contents again. Instinctively, Mike reached out, steadying him just enough to keep him upright. The gesture was simple, human, and deeply powerful. For the first time that evening, The old man felt seen. On the sidewalk behind them, the young men finally understood the weight of what they had done. The laughter that felt harmless moments earlier now echoed in their minds, cruel and small. The silence around them wasn't just imposed by fear of Mike Tyson. It was enforced by collective judgment. People began to whisper again, but the tone had changed. It was no longer gossip or distraction. It was reflection. By the time they reached the other side of the street, the old man's breathing had slowed. He stood a little straighter. The grocery bags felt lighter, not because they weighed less, but because he was no longer carrying them alone. Mike stopped with him at the curb. He didn't linger for attention. He didn't wait for applause. He simply ensured the man was steady, safe, and respected. The street noise slowly returned. Cars moved. People resumed walking. But something had shifted permanently. The young men dispersed quietly, their heads down, their lesson learned not through violence, but through presence, through accountability, through the undeniable power of standing up. Mike turned and walked away, blending back into the city as easily as he had appeared. But the impact of his actions remained, etched into the memory of everyone who witnessed it. The old man stood there for a moment longer, watching the crowd thin out. His hand still trembled slightly, but now it wasn't from fear. It was from the emotional weight of what had just happened. In all his years, he had learned not to expect help. He had learned to endure quietly, to survive without making waves. That day reminded him that dignity could be restored, even if only for a moment. As he boarded his bus, he replayed the scene in his mind, not the harassment, but the silence that followed, the way the city had paused, the way one person's decision had shifted the balance of power. Across the city, others carried the moment with them too. The woman who had stopped mid-step, the delivery driver who had slowed his bike, even the young men who walked away in shame. Each of them would remember that silence and what it demanded of them. The story would spread, not because it was sensational, but because it was real. A reminder that racism and disrespect don't always announce themselves loudly. Sometimes they creep in through laughter, through indifference, through moments when no one thinks it's their responsibility to intervene. Mike Tyson never spoke publicly about the incident. He didn't need to. His actions said everything. They showed that strength wasn't just about fists or fame, but about knowing when to stand between injustice and the vulnerable. For the old man, life returned to its familiar rhythm. The apartment, the quiet evenings, the careful budgeting. But something inside him had changed. The next time he walked through the city, he carried himself differently, not because the world had become kinder, but because he had been reminded of his worth. And for those who watched, the lesson lingered. Silence can be just as powerful as violence. Presence can dismantle cruelty. And sometimes the most meaningful moments happen when someone chooses to stop walking and pay attention. Stories like this matter because they reflect a truth too often ignored. Racism isn't always loud. Injustice isn't always dramatic. But dignity, once defended, leaves a mark that can't be erased. If the story moved you, if it made you think, or if it reminded you of a moment when someone stood up when it mattered most, show your support. Backhand index pointing right like this video. Share it with others. Leave your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe to Black Voice Story for more powerful, real-life inspired stories that deserve to be heard.